Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Can you believe there are only 90 days left till the end of the year? Parsity is going to have its new cohort starting in January of 2025. 3 of the spots are already taken out of 12. If you want to join and get a massive discount, this is the last week you can join Dev 30 and get a big old discount and prepare for the program. Go to dev30.xyz, dev30.xyz. I hope I see you in there. I hope you take advantage of this massive discount and we can start your career in 2025 as a software developer by working directly with me and our team. Back to the episode. All right. Today on the Develop Yourself podcast, I'll be speaking with Dr. Junaid Akhtar, content architect at Educator, which is one of my favorite platforms for learning software concepts. Thank you so much for appearing on the show. Happy to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here too.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you about the science of education, because as you probably know from working at Educator or just working with developers in general or learning yourself, is that it's really difficult to learn things like coding. And I run a program, Parsity, where we teach people basically how to switch careers and go from whatever they were doing in a past life to becoming software engineers. And what we see a lot is that people try to learn on their own. They go through many rabbit holes. They get stuck in tutorial hell. They have a hard time figuring out how do you learn, because it seems like learning as an adult is a bit different than learning as a kid. And when you're trying to switch careers or learn something really complex like coding, it requires a different strategy. So I'm excited to talk with you about that. But before we do, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got involved with Educator and exactly what you do as a content architect?
Right. I have been for most part of my life a university professor in course computer science departments. So I identify as a teacher. That's my self-image. That's been my self-image for some time now. But it seems as if there is a shift. I think there is a mass movement going on in academia as well. There's a shift from academia to industry. And most of the folks that are going away are those who are good teachers. It seems that there's not a lot of respectful place, a dignified place left for those who look at themselves as teachers. So the balancing act between research and teaching, which, by the way, both of them are really required, but the balance has somehow tilted towards research, and that too in just a form of publication. And there's a lot of gamification of research is going on. So sort of disenchanted after a decade-long stint within academia, but loved the teaching part, loved spending time with students, engaging with them, finding out what works and what doesn't. And a lot of that will come in, I think, within this podcast of ours. Is one thing I was apprehensive before joining Educator, because nobody knew what the hell does content architect mean,
When I read that title, I'm like, oh, what is that exactly?
Yeah. Right to my, so I was pleasantly surprised. It's not a lot that gets changed. Medium gets changed. We are to create learning experiences. There's not more, right? It's not student sitting in front of you. So it's not a performative act like the way it is in the classroom setting. But I was pleasantly surprised to know that there's still a lot of commonality. There's still teaching and learning. Not a lot changes. When it doesn't even matter what medium there is or what setting it is. There are some principles which just never change. And I hope we get to talk about them today.
Very, very cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to speaking about that. For those people that don't know what Educator is, can you just briefly explain what is Educator?
Educator is now about 8+ years old. It's a startup in the edtech domain, teaching computer scientists, software engineers, developers, anything that they want to learn. So that now 700+ courses like we're talking about over these many years that have been developed. There's other products such as learning paths. So it's not just courses. One of the things that you, of course, and anybody on the internet wants to know, okay, I've done one course. Where do I go from here? Okay. I mean,
Yep.
if you find something good, which is free on YouTube or Coursera or anywhere, but where do you go from there? So there's Curate Learning and KillPath, which is good for learners. There's Project, there's Cloud Labs. But I primarily am looking after this vertical, which is called Learn to Code, which is not for those who are already settled into and not primarily who are software developers already
Hmm.
in the tech industry. Those who are pivoting from some other career, careers in their early careers, but they want to pivot to development and coding. And those who are young learners or stay at home folks or
Yep.
anybody who wants to learn coding for the first time. So that's a challenging ground, but it's a creative challenge for us.
I
So
can imagine.
that's what
Yeah,
I'm
because
looking.
I'm in the same kind of space, and I learned to code maybe 11 something years ago, over a decade ago. I
At.
kind of forget. I remember it was really difficult, but I honestly forget a lot of what it was like being in the moment and learning to do it. And I remember a lot of the mistakes I made. I'm curious, what do you see that people generally get wrong about learning to code, or just maybe in general?
Yeah, I think it'll be good to step into it in stages, as in learning in general first. There are
Hmm.
things people get wrong, and there are misnomers and some widespread confusion. Because I think it was Gladwell, I think, who wrote this book called Outliers, the
Yes,
story
I'm
of
familiar with
success.
this.
But the central thesis is that you need to put in 10,000 hours in
Hmm.
order to get somewhere, right?
Yeah,
So that's very daunting. I mean, that's good enough to make people run away from anything, from learning anything new.
for sure.
But there's a very famous TED talk. It's one of the most widely, I think, viewed TED talks. It's by Josh Kaufman. And something like the title goes like something like the first 20 hours or something. And it's a book that he later wrote after he presented that TED talk, in which he dismantled this and criticizing this 10,000 hours thesis. And he points out that the author of 10,000 Hours book, he studied outliers as the name implies. So
Hmm.
those are exceptional individuals who are at the top of their uh, field, be it a sportsman or anybody, but they've put in so many hours. So that's the master guru we're talking about. But somebody who's just starting out, it's just unbelievable to ask them to put in 10,000 hours before we can take you seriously.
It's a
On
good point.
his
Yeah.
thesis is very interesting.
Hmm.
He says that it takes 20 hours as a number that hasn't popped out of thin air. He's done some research. So it's
Interesting.
like
Okay.
being good enough to be functional. That's the space we're talking about. It's
Hmm.
a sort of an 80-20 rule. It's like the learning curve, it plateaus off as in within the first 20 hours. And thereon, it's a very gradual learning curve. But initially, of course, you don't know anything about the space you're getting into.
That's right.
Um, but that's very encouraging for a new beginner. It's because 20 hours you can give.
For
It's
sure.
45 minutes or so for a month. That
Yeah.
one can dedicate, right? So those coming into coding, think of this is a wonderful space to be in. If you can create a learning experience for them, for these guys who are just about to start, but just think of it as a 20 hours experience. Both ways, the ones who are teaching and the ones who are learning. That's a good place to be in. But once you get the hook of it, but there's a method to it. It's not just like you just can't randomly plan those 20 hours. There's a
You
method
can't watch a
behind it.
YouTube video. You can't watch a 20-hour YouTube video, right? That's
No,
not going to
no, no,
work.
no.
Yeah.
You can't. You can't. You got to begin. You got to have a project that you would love to do. Josh Kaufman gave an example of ukulele. He learned to play ukulele for his daughters, for his daughter. But so one theory is that if you need to learn how to play guitar, I don't know if you know music or any instrument, for instance, if you need to learn guitar, for instance.
Sure.
So one theory, which is the bottom-up approach, that's going to say that you need to learn every chord out there, right? From E to G and everything in between. And you got to learn all the strumming patterns, for instance. And then every position on the fret and all the music theory. Once you spend, and again, this all adds up to 10,000 hours,
Sure.
then only then you can attend to your first song. But the other approach says that if there's a song that you love, that you really, really love, and what an incentive it will be that if you can just spend a few hours learning just those four chords that are to come into play just for this song. You don't need to know everything out there when it comes to music or to guitar playing, but just learn these four chords and just practice those. Because you instantly be knowing what you're working toward, right? There's a
Yeah.
goal,
hmm
it's defined. Of course, you won't, when you hit your first chord and it'll be bad. It'll be
Yeah.
bad.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
know what you're doing, right? Things will just keep adding up and you will create a feedback loop. You'll know the mistakes you're doing. But if you start out in the bottom up approach, you don't know if you're learning the A chord and you'll want to perfect it first and then move to the C chord.
hmm
But then why are you learning it? The motivation is steam. You run out of steam.
Yeah.
There's nothing is getting built up, nothing is adding up. So that's, I think he's on to something that you got to put these two ingredients in, which creates a method within those 20 hours. And so it's surprising. There's a direct analogy between music learning through this method.
hmm
And there's a guitarist on YouTube. I forget his name. He's done a wonderful YouTube vlog. But he's teaching. He spent 12 years of his life self-learning how to play guitar.
Wow.
And his video was that I can save you time, the mistakes I made. And he said exactly the same thing. Start from a song you love. Just work out. You don't need, and also about equipment. You don't need the whole drum, the electric guitar, the acoustic
Yeah. Right.
guitar, the amplifier and everything. You just need one guitar and one song. Just play that song for a few hours. And if you get hooked, you'll just get going. You got to learn enough to be able to self-correct, the most important thing. So when it comes to coding,
hmm
if we can come to that, there's a direct analogy. You can, and I've seen this treatment over and over and over again. Every other course starts from variables, then to data types when it comes to teaching programming,
Yep.
then to conditional statements and to loops and then to function, at the very end to the function. But they teach everything in isolation. Nothing get gelled together.
hmm
Nothing is being built. By the time the learner gets to finish the course, they've probably forgotten what happened at the start of the course.
Yeah. I hear this a
This is
lot.
the
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but this is the exact bottom up approach where things just keep coming out. The new learner, unlike the software engineers, they have a mental model. They don't know where to glue this new concept that is being thrown at them. That is
hmm
the problem. So nothing gets conceptually built in their mind. It's called a mental model. And every good teacher and those who come from academia, that's why it's important for EdTech to have good teachers in their content team, because building the mental model along the way for new learners is an absolutely important thing to do. So instead of the bottom up approach,
hmm
my approach in my pedagogy, that's a project based or problem centered approach.
hmm
Right away in the very first lesson, we say, it's a course on Python, that you're hired for this project, right? And these are the requirements. For instance, it's a ATM machine and its interface that they have to build. It's the calculator in which 5 random questions about addition, subtraction, multiplication, division are going pop up, and then score is going to be computed.
Hmm.
And so, but we show the learner the end product that they're going to build at the very start of the learning experience. So they know
Right.
right away, this is what we're going to build. Oh, okay, let me try that. It adds to their profile, right? It adds something. They've built one project at least. So in
Yeah.
20 hours, if you can build one project and everything that you then learn, if you got to learn functions, if you've got to learn libraries, if you've got to learn if conditions, for loops, everything is grounded in that project because they know we're learning this new thing, this new concept about programming and coding. We have to fulfill this one functional requirement of this project.
Sure.
And they see every lesson makes a good dent and encroachment on building that project. It's a different space to be in altogether. That's the approach that we take, and I like it, and I think a lot of our learners get to like it too.
Oh yeah, I really like that approach because what you mentioned is like the emotional attachment as well. Because it's really difficult to learn something if you don't have that emotional attachment, whether it's guitar or coding. And I have met a lot of people that have gone through Python courses specifically. This is a really interesting one, and they learn all these different concepts. But you're right, they don't
Mm.
have that way to glue it together. So
Yeah.
they know these pieces, and they say, "Okay, I know how to declare a variable. I know how to write this function." Or, but what do I do with this? What what do I build with this knowledge at this point? And they
Exactly.
have like a certificate but don't have much to go off of it for. So that's a really great insight there, that yeah, you need to have something that keeps you motivated, even because for 10,000 hours that's incredibly daunting, but even for 20 hours you're going to want to keep coming back to this project. It's a very cool way to
No, true,
approach it.
true, and I think it's very interesting that you mentioned. Is there any difference? I think you did ask between kids and those who are adults and in their learning.
Yeah.
One would imagine that there might be differences because in academia we often use this term called pedagogy, and it's just a, I think, Greek or Latin term which from peda, or it means the science and art of teaching kids, uh, uh, like a pediatrician
Hmm.
doctor for kids. As opposed to that, there's also another term, which is the andragogy, which is the teaching or learning for adults. But surprisingly, every research points to one thing. There's hardly
Yeah.
any difference. For both, for both, you need to build their motivation. You need to relate whatever is being taught to them and their reality. You got to place whatever you're about to teach in their reality, and you got to connect it with them, and that builds the initial motivation.
Hmm.
And without doing that, and without that kind of legwork, whatever you teach, it just never sticks. David Merrill, I think, yeah. So he put this theory. He came up with five. He said there's first principles of teaching and learning, as in first principles in philosophy are, and even in mathematics, they're those axioms that can't be, they are just assumed. They can't be proven to be true or false. But everything else is built based on those first principles.
Gotcha.
It's true in logic, it's true in mathematics. And according to David Merrill, it's true for teaching and learning. Wherever teaching and learning is taking place, there are first principles which are just like set in stone. So it doesn't matter if it's a kid, if it's an adult, if it's in university or a school or on an online MOOC or edtech space. There's teaching and learning going on.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter what medium is there. The first principle is again problem-centered approach. So it's got to be a sizable problem they define, or a task as a sizable entity which the learner is going to face in their ordinary everyday life. And if you know anything about coding, if writing an if condition is never a task, imagine your manager coming to you and saying, okay, you have to write an if statement today. Nobody does that, right? There's going to be a sizable
Yeah.
problem or a task that you're going to be
Hmm.
assigned and required to solve that. All your if conditional skills, your programming skills are going to come into play, but never the if condition on its own. or
That's
anything or
true.
any concept on its own.
Yeah.
So there's other, just another principle is, so the good thing is that there's not 10 or 50 principle or 100 principles, just five. Another interesting principle, which is often overlooked, is called demonstration.
Hmm.
Every teacher, every good teacher, every good course is to demonstrate the bad ways of doing things as well as the good ways of going about it.
Ah, yeah.
And it is so important for the new learners. If you just display to them the perfect and finished form of doing the thing in the first instance, and that's all you ever introduce to them, then it's just, you're just not leaving them anything but raw, anything but rote learning is what they're going to do. There's no invitation for building something, because when you build something, you try something, you make mistakes.
Hmm.
So every good teacher in every classroom making intentional mistakes in front of the kids, and then asking the kid or the students to, let's try and rescue the situation. So you got to bring some of those elements into ed tech space as well. And I've been experimenting with them. Anything that we've been doing in classroom settings,
Uh-huh.
can we bring those good practices here and those principles here? And I'm glad to report that after about 2 years of my being here in White Tech, a
Uh-huh.
lot of things, a lot of those things can be brought here. And I came across a paper. We
Hmm.
since this is about science, this is the kind of research that should be done, and that should be welcome. Somebody had studied MOOCs, a lot of online courses, but it's a bit dated. It's just 2017, but I think it still applies. And the finding was that most of them are offering great presentation, and and then their tech stack is wonderful. Their
Yes.
technology is wonderful,
Hmm.
but not so much their teaching. And there's the instructional design is very weak. The learning experiences are not great. And I think a lot of ed tech focuses on technology, but as the name implies, there's ed part to the ed tech as
That's
well.
right.
And I think any ed tech which focuses or brings this balancing act, besides their tech tag, if they focus on education part, I
Hmm.
think that pays off. That pays off.
When you say the tech stack, do you mean the tech stack that they're teaching or the tech stack that they're leveraging to facilitate the teaching or both?
Yeah, the the technology that enables this learning. For instance, when it comes to educative, um, we don't require our learners or our customers to install anything. It's just the browser that's required. And it's a very interactive platform, which
Hmm.
means just for coders and software developers. So no installation means that a lot of technology goes back into the Docker setups, libraries to be installed by the learner. All they need is a system, a browser is all they need. So there's going to be coding widgets. We're going to teach something text based, but then
Hmm.
there's going to be coding widget in which you are going to be asked to do some coding exercise. So that's what I meant by the technology stack. A lot of interactive widgets, illustrations, slides, and now with the introduction of GPT, a lot of
Oh, yeah.
generative, a lot of generative AI based widgets have also been developed. So that's the technology part.
Gotcha.
If you miss the education part, which, by the way, ensures the goodness or the learner's perspective is to be guaranteed by the ed part as well as the tech part. That's kind of what I meant.
Okay, no,
Uh,
thanks for that clarification. Which leads you to actually, you touched on something I've always found interesting about educative. Number one, I'm a fan of educative. I used it starting years ago when I wanted to learn data structures and algorithms for JavaScript, and it was the first course that really actually broke it down. It didn't teach like here's how you do binary search, or it didn't teach how you beat some certain problem. It taught me some concepts that I was able to use and then compose solutions no matter what the problem I saw, which I found really helpful. One of the things I liked the most about it is it didn't rely on a lot of video, especially because I was
oh,
past the stage where I was learning to code. I was like, hey, I want to learn something a little more challenging. I like videos, but I don't like having to sit through really long videos. Is there a motivation
mm,
behind why educative has chosen to go that route, because it seems that it's mostly text based, which I appreciate.
Yeah, as in there's a company wide perspective and the founder's perspective, and then there's my perspective to it. I would give both
Yeah,
to
I'm
you,
interested. Hmm.
because the founders, this was their central hypothesis. This was the USP, this unique selling proposition, that for software developers, video is not the most optimal way for going about learning anything new. Because there's a lot of software engineers are used to looking through and sifting through documentation. There's a lot of documentation out there. You just need to look up something, some reference, and you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
Just like you yourself mentioned.
Hmm.
But imagine if there's a video. That's a very First of all, it's not searchable. You can just control F and land at the very spot where they're going to teach you that concept, that very library or its API, its function, which is what you need. You're gonna have to sit through the entire video or browse through it and then find where that spot is. So that was their hypothesis, that for software developers,
Hmm.
text text based interface or learning experience is the way to go. So they created those courses, and I think they're right. So there's now other competitors too, but initially all the MOOCs, Coursera, and Udacity, you name it, all
Yeah.
of them went for video, which was what the professors, I guess, it was convenient for them more than anything else,
Yeah.
to record their lectures through a video and then upload it. But
Yeah, for sure.
I think the verdict is out. There is a pretty bad finishing percentages. Now it is a rarely does anybody finish a course online, which is
I've seen
video
that.
based,
Yeah.
because it's passive viewership. It's not that engaging. So
Hmm.
that's the perspective I got when I got here, and it's a text based decision that they've made early on, and I liked it. They called it courses. My perspective is I like to look at what I create as creating books rather than courses. It's just that, so it's still text based. That's what a
Yeah.
book is
Uh-huh.
at its heart. So one of the engagement or the interactivity, any good book that you've ever come across, be it from literature or fiction or any science fiction, any place, it's the text that engages its reader. It's the first paragraph. Any
Hmm.
any classic you take,
Yeah. First
it's
sentence,
the
paragraph,
text.
it's gets you in.
Yeah, but it's the text
Yes.
that engages. It's not the text, right? It's not the
Hmm.
illustration. It's not the cover. And don't judge a book by its cover. That's why there's this expression.
Hmm.
Um, so my take on this is that we create books. It's just that they are online, they are digital, and which is way better, they are interactive books. When I was in my undergrad and I was reading Dieter and Dieter C++ days, I wish, because we were reading a chapter, but we came across a piece of code inside a book, and it's a published book, right? It's in our
Yeah.
hand. It's a hardcover book. I wish there was a way I could just test this bloody code, but
Right. Yeah.
there, there wasn't. So I think this is the problem that we've solved with with the age, and with time and with technology, and it's the right direction to take. So it's a book, but it's interactive. It invites it. You can code, you can edit the code, you can test your concepts right there on the page, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's my
Getting that
take.
immediate feedback. Yeah, that's a good take. I mean, I've done a combination of videos and text, and I like videos for some things because they're kind of complex, especially if I want to show somebody like, here's the way I would do things, and this can help. but they're not always like required to watch because I really don't like super long videos because I have trouble sitting
Okay.
through those as well. I've done tons of courses online, and yeah, it's can be difficult hearing somebody talk for like more than 15 minutes. Really, 15 minutes is
True,
about when I'm like, okay, that's about as long as I want to watch you code some stuff.
true,
Yeah,
true. And then everybody's got their own rate of reading, whatever they're
yeah,
comfortable at.
hmm
And some people are really professional at quick reading,
yeah.
through the until understanding or taking the gist of it. So that's another benefit of text. People can pace themselves, even on one level.
I also just like the fact, like you said, it's searchable,
Yeah.
which is much easier because going through a really long video, like where was that one part where the guy did that one thing?
Oh,
You just get completely
yes.
lost.
Yes.
I'm curious what you think about this trend. I've seen the gamification of education. I've seen things like these, building block style programs for coding, which I'm not a huge fan of. But this whole trend, this idea of gamifying education, what do you feel about this?
Yeah. There's a there's a guy called Yukai Zhao, or I think it's Chinese. He wrote this book called Actionable Gamification. But the subtitle is, which is very interesting, Actionable Gamification Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboard. So I hope
Ah,
you get the gist of it. So there's
hmm
so we studied this because we got this feedback that our project based learning, which is a great pedagogy, it's problem based, it's action oriented, active learning, but still it's daunting, a little bit daunting for an absolute new beginner that you just show them the serious project at
yeah.
very first lesson.
How am I
So we
going to do
had to
that?
study. Yeah. So there were a lot of competitors. They were gamifying their content. So we studied
Mhm.
it. We studied it scientifically. So our finding is that there's two ways of going about it. One, gamification is of this kind that you create leaderboards. It targets extrinsic motivation
Mhm.
that you'll see a badge pop up if you finish two lessons in a streak, or you get a number. So this kind of gamification has a dark side to it as well, psychologically speaking. There's studies now, I think based on Duolingo and Duolingo's users, because they do a lot of gamification of this
Yeah.
kind, leaderboard.
Mhm.
So the paper showed the dark side to it, that people got too invested into this part of gamification, instead of focusing on what's there to be learned actually.
Yeah.
And eventually, many of them started gamifying just to stay on top. They
Oh,
cheated. They went to Google and got the
jeez.
answer with the right. So
Mhm.
there's a dark side to it. Another axis or an aspect which we explored was that there's people who wrote entire gaming engines as their tech part.
Okay.
What they're offering to the learners, they're asking the learners to clear this stage. They've designed a whole game which the learner has to uh, clear the stage after stage of that game. It's interesting character based games. They have to find their way through a maze or fight something else. It's an interesting storyline.
Okay.
But the issue was that there was no transfer of skills. There was not transferable skills happening there in the context of the game, and they were asked to write code, and only then their character would move.
Yeah, I've seen these
But
things.
out
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, but how do you take that learning experience and bring it to a problem that you're going to be asked to solve in the industry? Because there's not going to be a game engine there going
Exactly.
on, right?
Yep.
So then we designed this. We revamped this course, which is at the very start. It's the foundation of our Python learning, in which there's gamification as well, but not of leaderboard or that kind. There's a character, which is our Edward. It's a bot,
Mhm.
which is to move. It can do various functions. It can turn, it can move, it can clear garbage, or it can plant a pot or something. but there's puzzles that the learner is supposed to solve. But and on every lesson, so we if we are to introduce functions, there's a
Yeah.
lesson for that. There's the gamification part to the lesson, but then there's a Python widget which has nothing to do with the game. The game is only to introduce the concept of function or
Gotcha.
conditions or
Hmm.
string. But then we get to the Python space in which there's no more game. There's a cute little problem or challenge that they have to solve and apply that in that outside the context of game. So we found that balancing act between gamification and transferring of skills is what is actually worthwhile for the learner in the long. So again, protecting the interest of the long-term interest of learner. I think
Hmm.
that is what the edtech space needs to really guard, um, and that'll take us a long way.
I appreciate that nuance there too, because you're right. There's nothing bad on the face of gamifying, I guess, anything. It's really when you end up kind of like what we were speaking about before, when you said you're learning these concepts that don't like ladder up to composing a
Yes.
whole program or doing anything practical. So you're just doing this game thing.
Oh,
You're like,
right.
yeah, I'm learning stuff. And then you get to the end of it, you're like, okay, cool, I beat this level, but you still can't
Well,
code something
yes.
worthwhile.
So true. And I think one thing I'm loving here instead of as opposed to university, that we can experiment. We take this as experiments.
Hmm.
These changes that we made a course, we launched a course, and we traced the real usage statistics based on our users and their experiences, and how many of them we lost in what lesson. And as opposed to that project based learning, this revamped gamification did this worked really well.
Oh, very cool.
So with data, so we really look at this as experiments and database decisions. So I'm loving this space, this aspect of edtech as well,
That's cool.
because it's hard to measure any change you make in a university setting. It's just a few students sitting in front of you,
Yeah.
and the results, they don't come in with the kind of scale that edtech or the internet experience operates in.
Yeah, that's true. You can move really fast, and you're right. You collect tons of data because Educative has, I don't know, how many students does Educative have at this point? I mean, it must be in the hundreds of thousands or something, tens of thousands, or I don't know.
Yeah, it says on landing page, I don't know, 2+ million
Oh, okay. That
use
that makes sense
users.
too. That's a ton of people. It's a ton of data on learning.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
crazy. Couple last questions for you. If you were learning to code today, with no background in coding as an adult, how would you start?
That's a really tough question to know the answer to. As in, if I have no clue, of course I would go to Google, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the first landing spot for anybody. But now things are changing a bit. People also have access to generative AI or chatbots, GPT, and Claude, and Bard, and whatnot.
Hmm.
But no matter what I do and no matter where I go, I could, through Google or GPT, I could go to one place. It would perhaps be a YouTube video, or it could be a good blog that I will land in. Of course, the results that Google shows on the first page, they're not that bad. Although there's a lot of SEO optimization going on.
That's right.
So there's a lot of free stuff out there, which aggravates the problem for the new learner. Where do they go? Where do they begin from? There's a ton of not just
So much.
platforms,
Yeah.
not just social media options. There's a ton of languages, the computer programming languages, not just Python, it's Java, it's JavaScript, it's C++, it's uh, so many languages. Then there's so many frameworks, so many libraries, so many domains. There's machine learning, so much
Yeah,
bug
for
that you're
sure.
just spoiled. you're spoiled for choice. If you don't know what you want, and if you turn on Netflix, you're going to waste a lot of time.
Yeah, right.
Because
Scroll, scroll, scroll.
yeah, it's a lot of scrolling. You don't know what you want. So
Hmm.
that is a number one problem. Our experienced software engineers, which is one type of user the educator has, they know what they want.
Hmm.
They would search for it and they would just get it. They would know where to go. And even if they don't, they will figure it out pretty soon by just a few searches. But if you have no idea where to start from, anything and everything would appear just as likely, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
that is where people go wrong. That is where they end up wasting a lot of time.
I've
And
seen it
there's
a
a
lot.
widespread confusions now because of GPT coming in, that it's just a matter of writing one prompt and you're done, or you got the
Yeah.
perfect experience. But that's not the case. I think no shortcut to well curated learning experiences backed by professional research. What works? For instance, our tagline is for our learn to code vertical, the path, for instance, our Python path, it says we take you from your first line of code to making you job ready. So it's not just one course that we are going to offer you.
Hmm.
We're going to offer you this
Like a
whole
path.
experience,
Hmm.
right? Like a path. We know what is to come after your first procedural programming course on Python. When do you get from there to object oriented programming? When do you get from there to algorithms and data structures and databases and then APIs and libraries and then Git and software engineering principles,
Hmm.
and then to coding interview preparation, and only then we make you ready for your first interview or for internship or junior developer.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm answering your question. It's a very
It is.
hard
It's
question to
difficult.
solve.
Hmm.
I don't think anybody has solved it to the degree that it's a solved problem now, and nobody else in the world would need to do any further experiments. How do you take somebody who does not know how to write one line of code, and
Yeah,
how do you get them prepared uh, for industry? That is a very hard problem
it's
to
difficult.
solve. And it's going to take, like any other engineering or any problem in the hard problem of the world, it's going to take a lot of professionals, a lot of iterations, a lot of experiments in order to solve that problem.
Yeah. Before we leave, any last words of advice for our audience?
I think we should just go full circle and remind the audience that 20 hours is all you take. But if you have that method right, which we talked about, and the better listen to that again and again, if it comes to that. So don't be overwhelmed or by those who are asking you to spend 10,000 hours to go before you can become a developer or a coder. Perhaps 20 hours is all it takes, but if well curated and well spent.
That's great advice. Really good for people to hear out there. Where can people find you online? You're a wise man. You seem to have a lot of knowledge of education. And where are you at online? Where can people find what you're talking about, what you're doing?
People, I don't know about being rough and bloody, but yeah, find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on anywhere. I would love to engage with people who want to talk to me or learn anything or teach me anything. It's a two-way process always. I find those who are good teachers, they're always good learners. There's no other way.
I
There's
like
no
that.
other way.
I like that. I'm going to have your information in the show notes for people that want to contact you. And thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was fun, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.